Today I want to share with you an idea that kind of popped in my head the other day as I went to sharpen my chisel, and I wanted to do it real quick. Now, I've had these prisms in my toolbox for just over a year now, and I keep finding more and more uses for them, and this happens to be one of them. I'll show you how that works. I'm Dave with Stringing It Together, and let's dive in. Now, if I want to get this laser sharp, I'd be reaching for my Japanese whetstones. Now, those are like blocks that you get them wet, and they work really well. Come from Japan, obviously, which is, samurais back in the day. I think when samurai swords makers used to take their sword to present it to the samurai, the way they tested it is they drop a piece of silk, and if the silk didn't split in half on the sword blade, then they'd use that sword to cut the sword maker's head off. So they know what they're talking about when it comes to sharpening things. So the thing with those Japanese whetstones is how perfectly flat they are and perfectly smooth they are. Now, I don't know if you've ever tried to get anything flat before, but it is a bit difficult, and one thing that you can use is glass. So before I had those Japanese whetstones, I would use a thick pane of glass with sandpaper taped to it in various degrees. So I'd start rough and go sharper, but the thing with a prism is you have three sides and it's glass, so you know that it's perfectly flat. So here's a prism here, and the reason it's perfectly flat is because glass is obviously liquid that's poured into a mold. So even if the mold isn't perfectly flat, the top layer is going to be perfectly flat. So the only thing you have to keep in mind is make sure you're buying a glass prism. Now, you can find these on Amazon or Walmart website for fairly cheap. Make sure it's glass though. So I always have two of these prisms around in my toolbox at all points. One I use as a sort of a three-corner file. It's great for working over the body or just cleaning up marks from my Stuart McDonald three-corner file. And then the other one I use as a reference tool for leveling one fret at a time. I sort of copied it from the Stuart McDonald fret kisser idea. I'll link to those videos, as well as I have an entire course which you can download for free in the description below, called Proof Fretwork, that'll teach you how to use these to level your frets, level, crown, and polish your frets in a way that's super easy to understand and basically impossible to screw up. Anyway, I'm going to show you how to make this. I just took one side off this. Basically, this is just a prism with different grits of sandpaper, double-sided tape, or makeshift double-sided tape with blue painter's tape and super glue, which you've probably seen me do in previous videos, but I'll just do it real quick here for you. So as I mentioned, I got 220, 400 here, and then I'm going to put the 320 sandpaper on here. Aluminum oxide is what I typically use. And I'm not using gloves here, which I typically regret later, but I didn't get any on my hands this time. So you put the blue painter's tape on, cut it off, put a thin layer of super glue on there. You don't want any bumps, and stick that sandpaper on there. Cut it, and then give it a quick check to make sure that there's no spill out. So I'm going to give that a couple minutes to dry, and then just double check it to make sure that there's no bumps in the sandpaper. It has to be perfectly flat, obviously. Now here's my chisel here, and this is a very expensive chisel. This is one of those things that I like to cheap out on a lot of tools, which you can see if you've seen my channel at all. But this is one that I really, broke the bank for, and it's worth its weight in gold. This is even the reason that I have those Japanese whetstones. Actually, is I was working at a music store fixing guitars, and there was an old carpenter that lived upstairs, a wood carver actually, and he saw this chisel that I was using, and he decided to sell me his extra Japanese whetstones, which I have to this day. I think because he saw that I had a really fine chisel. Anyway, that's an aside. I'll show you how to use it. It's a bit of a technique to it, and you want to make sure that you don't screw it up. So when you're sharpening the chisel, you have to match this angle perfectly. Now, you can do that with your hands, or you can get a little attachment that will allow you to hold it in place, and it has wheels, so you can just roll it back on, say, your sandpaper or your whetstone or whatever. I typically don't like using them on the whetstone because the wheels kind of leave little marks on there, so I usually resort to using just my hands anyway. And there's a technique for that, which is sort of cupping it with your backhand here and then pressing down, mostly focusing your energy on this front tip here. So you kind of roll it forward until you feel that that's perfectly level. Pushing down with, sometimes you can use two hands or one hand, and this backhand is really loose, and just making sure that you're not letting gravity affect it, and then you're pulling it back like that. Okay. Now, this nice thing about this is that it's not going to be affected by gravity. So for a nice quick little sharpen, it works really good. And I find that I can just, go with one finger here and just pull it back. And since it's not affected by gravity, it's a lot easier to actually keep it stable because you're on a 60-degree angle here. So you can start with the 220 side and then work your way up. I'm just going to start with the 320 because my chisel doesn't actually need the 220. Make sure to clean away any debris on there. You can sort of test it. Sometimes I just use a bit of this tape to see if it gives you a clean cut. That's how you know it's getting fairly sharp. And then you can move on to your next layer, which is, for me, it's the 400. And you can go, if you want to go laser with this, you can get, up to like the 600 to 1000 range. So here's the technique that this old carpenter also showed me. If you just want a quick little judgment of how sharp your tool is, you stick it on your thumb, and without putting any weight on it, so I'm only just putting the weight of the chisel, and it should get stuck. It shouldn't move. Before I did the sharpen, it just took sort of a layer of my nail off, but when it's sharp, you should be able to, it should get stuck there, okay? It's kind of a old folk way of doing it, I guess, but yeah, that's very sharp. And the other thing that you can do is, if you have, say, this side is not perfect, then you can run it along here and fix up that non-flat part if it's not flat. This one's good already, so I'm not going to touch it. So there you go. It may not be samurai level sharp, but it's pretty sharp. And the thing is, I always have this sitting around anyway because I use it for a variety of other things for fixing my guitars. I'll link to those videos at the end, and I'll also put a link to that Foolproof Fretwork course, which you can download for free, and that'll show you how to level, crown, and polish your frets. More importantly, it'll show you how to properly diagnose the issue, which will hopefully save you a lot of time. Just like if you were to show up to the doctor with a stomach ulcer and he decides to cut your gallbladder out, it's a bit unnecessary and it's going to do some damage. So that's why within this course I made sure that there's the diagnostics first and foremost, and if you nail the diagnostics, then it will save you from doing a ton of unnecessary work. So that being said, give this a thumbs up if you found it useful. As always, drop a comment in the comment section below. You can find that course in the details section, and that's all for now. We'll see you next week.